You are listening to the podcast Women Ending War, where you will hear the voices of Israeli and Palestinian women dedicating their lives to creating a new reality in this land. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
This is Hannah Wacholder Katzman. We've been friends for a long time now, I think, actually.
Right.
Yes, I think we met probably 10 or 15 years ago, right, through our blogging circles. Is that right?
Right. No, I was reminding you recently about some comment you left. You wrote something and I responded. I blogged about it, and and you came into the comments and we had a little conflict.
I didn't remember that at all, but I did follow you, right? You were blogging at A Mother in Israel, and I was blogging at A Jewish Feminist, and we were like always writing about similar issues, about gender
social
issues and sexual abuse.
About the religious world. Yeah.
You were really on it. You were always like ahead of the game when it came to issues of like sexual abuse in the Jewish community, and just, yeah. And then, of course, since then you've become, like, you also done much more writing, and now you're a peace activist. And yes,
I don't know if I would describe myself as a peace activist. I kind of shied away from the conflict. But let's talk about that.
Right. Your son. Okay. Well, today we're here to talk a little bit about your son. Today we're here to talk about your son, Dr. Hayim Katsman, who was the peace activist. Yes, he described himself as a peace activist, and who was tragically killed on October 7th at his home in Cholit while he was trying to rescue some other people, right? He did some heroic rescuing before he died. And so we're going to talk about him and then talk about what you've been doing since then.
Okay, so Hayim, Hayim, maybe I'll put some links to where I speak about Hayim more at length. So I'll just say briefly, Hayim was 32. He grew up in Petah Tikva. We were a religious Zionist family. He was my first to be born in Israel. We came to Israel in 1990 with one baby. Hayim was born a year later, 1991. And already in high school, he was kicked out of the Yeshiva high school by someone who became the education minister eventually. And
I know who you're talking about just by virtue of minister and Petah Tikva. Shai Piron, is that who you're talking about?
Yeah.
He was the principal that kicked your son out of school because he wasn't towing the line. Okay.
Yes, he didn't toe the line, and he wanted him to toe the line. He was an excellent student, and I looked at his report cards. His secular teachers praised him. The secular studies teachers praised him, and the religious studies teachers were disappointed in him because he didn't participate enough. And I feel bad for him that he had to, have teachers who were disappointed in him because their job wasn't just to teach them, the Talmud and Bible. It was to to have him lead a religious, observant lifestyle. And he'd already decided by 11th grade that he wasn't interested in that and that he was an atheist. And he was very popular. He was always popular.
I just want to say that's such a stain on the religious world, that story. So
they didn't want him to really leave. And the administration didn't speak to us, only the counselor. Eventually, when Hayim...
And what a loss, because he was such an amazing guy. I mean, he was a guy who was
really
brilliant.
He was really devistated. He was very insulted, and he wanted to stay, and he had his friends in his place. But then he eventually realized that they wanted him to toe the line, and that they would take him back if he would do that. But there was another school that was called, where you could just study for the matriculation exams, and they didn't have... It was a religious school, and there were a lot of dropouts from other religious high schools. There's about 10% dropout rate in religious high schools. And
I think it's more, actually.
And probably by now it's more than... I don't know. It's a number I heard a long time ago.
Yeah.
And he succeeded there. There you needed to be motivated. It wasn't for kids who were weak academically or who, had learning disabilities or whatever. And he was motivated, and he even started university. So he started Open University, and then he enlisted in the army afterward. While he was doing that, toward the end of his army service, he went back to the university they let him, start taking courses already. And he finished about a year or two later in philosophy and political science. And then he moved to Kibbutz Cholit with friends, some from Petach Tikva actually, who joined to strengthen an aging kibbutz. The kibbutz had actually originally been in Sinai, in the Sinai Desert, and when the Sinai Desert went back to Egypt, it moved to the Gaza envelope, way down at the end, very far south, near Kerem Shalom. And for those who know, so he worked as a mechanic in a neighboring moshav, an agricultural settlement not too far from him. And he went to Ben Gurion University in Beersheba in the south also to study political science for an MA. And, I didn't mention that he's a musician. He was a musician. In high school, he learned how to play guitar, classical, then bass guitar, and the drums. And he became a DJ at the end, last few years. He opened a business where he would play electronic music. I'll backtrack a minute. So he got his MA, and while he was there in his second year, there was a visiting professor from the Israel Studies Department in Seattle, in the University of Washington. And he was impressed with Chaim's work, and he suggested that he apply for doctorate at the University of Washington. He did apply to a few other places, but he was accepted to this prestigious program in international studies at Jackson School, and where he learned Arabic and became exposed to Arabic electronic music, which fascinated him. And he wrote his doctorate on the national religious Zionist community, which is like very current because of the religious Zionist party, that many don't feel really represents the public, the national religious public, and has become very, very extreme. So,
which, by the way, did you see that Naftali Bennett yesterday opened a new party? He's coming back with a new party.
Yes.
So this is all works in progress. All of this whole religious Zionist enterprise, very relevant. Yes, Chaim's work is extremely relevant.
Yes. So, he interviewed people from the neighboring religious settlements in the area. And he came back during COVID. He came back to do his field work, and he taught a couple classes from here, and received his doctorate in 21, I think. And he looked for a job, and he was while he was doing his doctorate, he was still working at the garage a couple days a week. He became very friendly with the owner there, and really learned how to do it well.
Such a brilliant, diverse, creative, curious, independent-minded, autodidact. Yes?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, he told me he was going to quit the garage and was going to become the gardener of the kibbutz. So I know he took at least one course, but like you say, I think he mostly taught himself. And he was very interested in, sustainability. And he said to me when the pandemic started, he said, "Ima, how do you feel about being ahead of the trend?" Because, I also had a cooking blog, and I'd write about sourdough. I used to write like how to make sourdough and stuff like that. And he started making it. And so that was what he said to me. Of course, I told him I was. It was just funny because, during the pandemic, everyone started making it.
That's true.
Yeah.
So tell me something. So you recently wrote a book chapter about this, about
it was really, it's personal. The book is called Rakot Mi Barzel. It's about soft as iron. The war is called The Swords of Iron. So it's about women since October 7th, and it's really more research, a lot of qualitative research about different sociological processes that were happening since the war. There's an article about feminist organizations in Israel and how they reacted to October 7th. There's a chapter There's a chapter about wives of soldiers and how they are coping. There's a chapter about women who took on new roles after October 7th and changed their trajectory. There's one about therapeutic techniques during the war.
So what's your chapter about?
My chapter is different. It's personal. It's a diary, really, of the months after October 7th, with the Hebrew calendar. And it's in Hebrew, like I said, I think. And it kind of veers between the personal and the public, and what it was like to be mourning when everyone else is fully aware, and they're also undergoing trauma or pain because of the situation, as in so many ways, so many people, whenever someone dies, so many people are affected, and so many soldiers were killed, and of course what's happening in Gaza, even though, not everyone cares about that, but, it's still there. And and just, being at war and all the protests and so on. So, I talk about the protests in the chapter also.
Do you want to share a little bit about what you wrote about?
Okay, I can remember. The book is coming. I finished my chapter a while ago. It's a book. It takes a while, but we're going to have a book launch in Tel Aviv on May 7th. So if anyone's interested, they can write to me about that. Or in purchasing the book. It's about 100 shekel for pre-purchase.
Who's the editor?
Dr. Varda Zilberberg. And there's a chapter by Dr. Khania Blanca, who writes about the Holocaust. She studied the effect of the Holocaust on Israeli society. That's her specialty. And she wrote about October 7th in light of the Holocaust. There's also a chapter by Chana Safran, who's from Isha L'Isha in Haifa.
Mm-hmm.
Isha L'Isha, woman to woman. It's a feminist. It's one of very prominent feminist organization that's based in Haifa.
I think it might have been like the first feminist organization in Israel. I'm pretty sure.
Yes,
the 70s.
She actually left Israel in light of the political situation and is living in New York. So I talk about the protests. I talk about how I was active in the protests really from the very beginning against this government. The attempt to politicize the courts, to have more religious coercion that affects women, strengthening the rabbinic courts. And some of these laws have passed, of course, allowing people to write in their contract that they want it to be arbitrated according to the religious court, and not a secular court. Just one of many examples. And just the anti-democratic attitude of the and intentions. That's also something that Chaim wrote about. He wrote about after he finished his doctorate, he began to write about. He spoke at a conference called "The Americanization of the Israeli Right," and he wrote a book chapter in a book in Hebrew by that title. That is about, so it's about the foundations of it and how the national religious public, which is, again, what he wrote his doctorate about, how they are now very influential in the government and how they try to use this conservative movement, which isn't really, it's our own flavor of conservative ideas.
Like the Kohelet,
exactly,
like
all
Project
about
20, Kohelet, Project 25 are like parallel.
Interesting, right? I guess so. Yeah, I mean, like we talked about sexual abuse. So I think already in 2021, there's a study on, quote unquote, a study on their website, and with recommendations, and they basically recommend that there be less that women who withdraw an accusation be prosecuted. withdraw sexual abuse accusation, be prosecuted, and other things along those lines. So, yeah. So,
which happened in Cyprus, by the way, in 2020, right before COVID, with the, we went. Were you there in that group that went to
I
Cyprus
didn't go,
to
but I
support?
was very aware. I couldn't go, but yeah.
I mean, we went there because this woman had, she was gang raped by 12 Israeli kids, men or whatever. And then she was under so much pressure to withdraw, so she finally withdrew, and then they put her on trial instead of the 12 rapists. Anyway, so yeah, it felt so backwards. We were there at the courthouse. It felt like we were in some kind of like witch trial.
There was another case just now with Arab Israelis.
Yeah. And I don't know who exists, but a very similar case.
I didn't hear about it before. I just heard about it now that they acquitted them because they said the woman wasn't reliable and so on, But
it's a crazy thing for me to like consider how all of these things are connected, how like the Trump world and the Netanyahu world are connected, and how sexual abuse and misogyny are such an integral part of it, that the destruction of democracy, the takeover of extreme capitalism, the approach of violence and misogyny, and racism also, like that, how all of these things are intertwined, and it doesn't matter if it's in Israel or America. They're different iterations.
Afghanistan and Iran, when they became, when they were had
the misogyny and the violence against women always seems to be somehow
it's controlling of women and yes.
So anyway, getting back to Hayim just for a second, because you were saying that the protests were very important to you, and then you were saying that he wrote about it. Did you connect around the protests? Like, did you go to protests?
A little bit. I know he went. I don't think he went that often to protests. I know he told me once. He was in Tel Aviv and he was dating someone who lived in Tel Aviv, and he went to a protest occasionally. I don't know. So
in this chapter, the chapter is a diary.
So I talked about how the protests, how like people said that, the protests were the fault, or what caused October 7th. So I wrote, like, what does that mean? I'm responsible for my son's death because I was involved in the protests, and it's just.
I hate that. I've heard that too. People say, like,
people say, that October 7th that.
Because Hamas said that they saw a weakness in Israel because Israel is so split. But that claim, excuse me, that claim is coming from right-wing corners that don't want to see any criticism of Netanyahu. But if they actually cared about the weakening of the country, they would have stopped the judicial reform.
Exactly, that's what my friend says. My friend says, the government has a responsibility to ensure stability, to ensure that that they don't go to the extreme. And
that they listen to the people.
Exactly.
The government basically took half the people of the country.
For all the people, but they're not acting like it. They've been captured by this extreme. And right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what Hamas saw. Yes. Hamas saw that the government was stopping to care about half the people, and that half the people were really upset. It wasn't that, it's a protest.
I don't know. When someone, I don't know. We can't know, but.
I'm sorry.
We can't know. We don't know, but we can't say for sure that it's because of one thing or another. That we can say.
That's true too. I didn't mean to say for sure. I didn't mean to imply that. We know that this is why it happened. But if those claims about Hamas saw weakness, the responsibility for that is Netanyahu. That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yes.
No, it's okay. We only have about 10 minutes.
We have about.
No, we have time. I'm sorry. Okay, you can.
That's okay. That. Hang on one second. I just have to. Sorry, that was really comfortable.
Okay. So in the chapter, I talk about that. I talk about the different milestones, I guess you could say. About Israel Memorial Day, how it really wasn't so significant to me beforehand. Like many Americans, I didn't really connect to it so much. And then a couple weeks beforehand, I started getting messages from people like, I'm thinking about you and all this. And it took me a while to understand that it was about Israeli Memorial Day coming up. And someone said to me that in Israel, it used to be more for the families, and now it's become more for everyone. I don't know. I think now so many more people are affected. And, Chaim's father said, "Are you going to go to the cemetery?" And I said, I don't think so. It wasn't even, and I don't go to the cemetery. I'm not one of these people who goes to the cemetery very often. And then I realized I had to go. I couldn't just ignore it. I couldn't, because I would be there. My absence would be just as, I can't ignore it. My absence would be just as powerful a statement as going. Do you know what I mean? And that wouldn't help me. You just can't, ignore it. You can't just, you have to just.
Do you feel like you've lost the ability to make your decisions based on what's right for you, and suddenly you have this
No, I know.
obligation to think about how?
I don't feel it was wrong for me to go. I mean, I knew that if I wouldn't go, I would regret it, and I would be sitting at home. It wouldn't just be another day. It couldn't just be another day. That's it. There was no way it was just another day. So I had to be at the cemetery. That was just what I had to do.
So what was the process of writing? What was that like for you?
Wow. So I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and I had this draft, and I sent it to the editor, and she sent it. I don't even remember. Then I wrote another draft. We agreed I'd write another draft. I knew it needed a lot of work and it took me longer, and I made another draft. And then she said, "I'm sending you the editor." So there's an editor. Her name is Aya Elia, and she's edited the works of Nava Semel, who's this second generation writer who writes about the Holocaust. She's considered a second generation writer. She's a powerful figure in Israeli society and literature. And she's the editor of this volume. So I'm sure she helped me more than anyone else because she helped me organize it. Because at first I was going to write about each month. I thought I'd write a theme about each month, and then that didn't work because I had themes that recurred, in subsequent months. So she said, so we just did it more or less as a straight diary with dates, and some dates have a couple of entries, like in the beginning, the first few days of when we got the news and the Shiva, and then, it spreads out a little bit more. So yeah, it was hard to write about those things. I mean, I tried to be straightforward, and she helped. She just helped me a lot with organizing it, and of course with the editing. I write in Hebrew, so it's mostly now. So she said that I didn't feel like it's the second language, but she did tell me that later on. She told me she got rid of a lot of Hebrew, English sounding phrases, made them Hebrew sounding. But
how has this year been for you? This year and a half? How are you really?
Yeah, that's hard to answer. But there was definitely easing up after the first year. After I knew that every event, every memorial, we had many, leading up to it, there was tension, and a lot of times I spoke. So sometimes anxious about what I was going to say. But then afterward, there was always a drop. It always took me time to recover. I think after Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, Memorial Day and Independence Day, took me a couple weeks. And after October 7th, the first anniversary, and then Simchat Torah, which I really dreaded, and I thought it was okay. I remember thinking, well, what day of the week was it? It was a Thursday. And afterward, it was okay. It went okay. I managed. I was mostly in my synagogue. My daughter came with her kids, and then it hit me afterward, maybe after Sukkot, I don't know, but there's always a down, I have to recover. It's very emotional.
You've done a lot of speaking though this past year.
Yeah.
You speaking where?
Well, there were a lot of academic events because Chaim, from the Ben Gurion, where he got his MA, University of Washington had a webinar, the scholarly legacy of Dr. Hayim Katsman, which was really an honor for someone so young. So I spoke there. there was an event at Van Leer Institute for 3 scholars to memorialize 3 scholars who were killed on October 7th. There was someone did a panel at this conference on the Israeli, on the right, on the right political right in Israel, like 100 years of the political right in Israel. So she dedicated a panel and spoke about him. I didn't go, but she sent it to me. I didn't speak there.
That's nice that people are looking for ways to memorialize him and
Yeah,
keep his mind alive.
It is really meaningful. Yeah. So those have eased up. Like whoever was going to have something already had something, but now we're doing this fundraising project, which is, something I wanted to do. So I'll talk a little bit about that now.
Sure.
Okay. So there's this project called Next October, where they try to match up. I think initially they tried to match up a new startup. They wanted a new startup for every person killed on October 7th. And I guess that wasn't so realistic. And they had been talking to me about one of Chaim's friends, worked in high tech, and he was interested, but then he went to reserve duty. So I didn't hear from them for a while. I wasn't thinking about it, to be honest. Then she calls me up. I have the perfect company for you. It's a startup called Cause Match, which I'd heard of because the organization I worked for, Center for Women's Justice, had done a they
did a Cause Match campaign
beforehand.
Yeah.
So I met. So they said you could do any kind of memorial, like it can be an activity for the staff, or it could be something on their website. But I met them, and they said, "Look, we're crowdfunding, and we want to donate a crowdfunding campaign in Chaim's memory, and you need to just tell us what." So among the things that Chaim did is he worked. He was asked by the community center in Rahat. Rahat is the only Bedouin city in Israel, and this woman, she's in charge of sustainability, and she hired Chaim to start 2 community gardens with school children and their mothers and the staff in the school. In fact, one of the teachers came after the Shiva with the woman who was Jewish, the woman from the center. She herself is Jewish. She lives in a kibbutz right next to Rahat, which they consider a suburb of Rahat. It's called Shoval. So so Chaim really enjoyed it, and he spoke Arabic, and he knew about gardening, and he was really proud of his work in these gardens, and they're still going on, and they invited me to visit and see them, which I will in the next few weeks. So I called her up and I asked her if she had an idea, because I knew that the project had to be inclusive. Like it couldn't be something that only benefited Jews in Israel. I knew like it needed to be something that also benefited the Arab population here. That was important to me. So she told me that she was starting to raise funds for a project that's already approved. It's a sustainability center in Rahat, and it's not a big building. It's an educational center. It's not on the grounds of the community center, but somewhere else. And it'll have classrooms, it'll have a greenhouse and a recycling center, recycling room, and they'll be bringing school children there, and it'll be open to the public and to school visits from all over. And it will also have but it's also adjusted to the Bedouin population. So like one of the things that she told me at the time back then was that about the gardens was that they can't just have the gardens anywhere in Rahat. Like here in my neighborhood in Jerusalem, there's a community garden in the park, and I bring my compost there and people volunteer there. But in Rahat, there is very little enforcement of zoning laws, and they can't have the community garden wouldn't succeed out in the open, so they had to do it on the school grounds. So there's really a need for environmental education and in that population. So I didn't look any further, I don't know. I decided this was a project, and it's with what's called the Chevrat HaMatnasim, which is the Association for Community Centers in Israel. So I am working with a friend who's who's been a fundraiser for a long time, Lori Heller.
Mm.
And, she feels that this is it was really important to me that we know where the money's going. It's not something that's dependent on a lot of unknown factors. I didn't want to start my own nonprofit or it's a one-time thing. I'm not going to be doing this every year. There's already a budget for the first 5 years, and hopefully it will earn its own.
So when you have links, share the links and we'll put them up. Yeah,
the actual campaign is going
fantastic.
to be May 18th, but we're starting to prepare before with, to line people up who want to help us fundraise. So please let me know if you're interested in
That's lovely.
in not just donating, but helping others, encouraging others, reaching out to people to donate.
Yeah.
So
I'll definitely share.
Thank you so much,
I'll
for
definitely
that.
share
I
that.
appreciate that. Chance to plug it.
For sure.
And they're going to name it after
sure.
Chaim also. They're going to, I have to get the name in Arabic. But
how, it's so all these like different ways that his spirit, who he was, like he was such a rich spirit.
yeah, tomorrow night they're having he was a DJ at a festival in Kiryat Tivon in the north, and tomorrow they're having another festival in his memory. They're having it's part of the festival. They're having a party and they're going to play his music.
And you were talking also before about places you have been speaking. You also speak with all kinds of groups. You're connected to all kinds of groups of people commemorating October 7th in different ways, and families.
I don't know. It's kind of random.
Or protest and the protest. You still go?
Yes, actually, later today I'm going to be speaking at the tent. In the protest tent, they've organized a series of lectures, so I'm going to speak for 10 very short talks. I'm just going to speak a little bit about Chaim's article, one of his articles about the disengagement and how it kind of led to this current judicial reform with the connection.
Yeah. Interesting. Share that also. I would love to see. I would love to read some of his writings too.
Oh, sure. And there's and he also, and I also, you talked about the protest. So I go to, I actually spoke to the Association of Small Reform Congregations through a student of my father's. My father taught at Hebrew Union College. So one of his students is in, I think, Chattanooga. And she asked me to do a Zoom talk. This was a while ago, but I did a Zoom talk during COVID, they got together, the small congregations, to have their own activities on Zoom. So I spoke to that group, and, it's whoever asks. I rarely say no if someone asks me to speak. So I also, have been active in the protests, and I was going, now the Knesset just isn't in session anymore, but I was going every week to be with the hostage families. Hostage family members would go into the committees and speak for a few minutes at the beginning of each session. It was kind of depressing, because you saw the MKs, were pretty obnoxious. They didn't say anything, or they tried to offer sympathy, but it was,
looked away. There were a whole bunch of MKs that couldn't look, like Gafni and Shikli had all these different stories of.
Yeah, there was this thing. I was in the thing with Michal Vertiger, who, then she was saying, of course we think about the hostages day and night and so on, and we can't sleep and so on. But then, the next day, she was on this law that was going to prohibit negotiating or something like that with to return hostages. So, I
saw yesterday John Paulin posted saying that he can't stand looking at the coalition members wearing the yellow ribbon.
Right. And I saw them I met them for the first time. They live in my neighborhood, but I went to the Knesset with October Council, which is trying to get a national inquiry commission to about October 7th, and Netanyahu's against it.
Yeah, of course he's against it because it's going to
And they
show
didn't let
him in a
us.
bad
They
light.
didn't let us into the Knesset when Bibi was speaking. But then I went with them again last Wednesday, and a week ago, I guess, was it 2 weeks ago, and they said that it was. And we were allowed to go up when we heard Bibi's speech. Bibi said, I was looking at the headlines, and they didn't say all of the things. There were some other headlines they could have had. So, like, for example, he said, people say we don't care about the hostages, but Sarah and I speak about them every night and every morning.
And then he goes and undermines the process and sabotages the process and passes laws
so, like,
against.
That's just whatever.
It's paka
really
paka.
Appalling.
It's,
and it wasn't fair to be there.
Yeah.
So, did you say something?
No. Well, I'm saying it's paka paka, meaning like it's just
Yeah.
it's words.
Yeah,
it's
no, the
paka
whole speech,
paka.
it was pretty unpleasant to listen to it. But I met some family members, of that I don't really have a lot to do with. I wasn't, because I didn't live, like, first of all, like the Nova families from the party, they have their own groups. And then they're the people who lived in the kibbutzim, and they have their, social connections. And I didn't live there. So I don't really have, so I have some connections, with people who lived in Cholit and people from other ways. As time goes on, I have more, but I talk about that in the group, in my talk, in my speech in my chapter,
in my book,
about how, like, I met this woman, and she was telling me, we were talking about this group that has with Palestinians and Israelis, the forum you've talked about often. And so she said she joined, but she doesn't really have room to hear other people's stories. And I get that a lot. I mean, I was also at some event with other families, and sometimes you just don't. So, like, I have my support group. I have people who support me. Like, when I go somewhere, I went to a kiddush recently. Like, somebody invited me, for a small meal on Shabbat, on Sabbath. And I realized afterward that nobody knew, except for the hostess and a friend that I came with, about Hayim. And I'm used to being, when I'm at a table for Sabbath meal, people know, everyone knows already, about Hayim. And these people were strangers. They didn't know. And I tell people, like, very, very often. This time I didn't feel like telling people. It was a social event, and it was a short, and and I always have to decide who I'm going to tell and who I'm not going to tell and how I'm going to tell. And usually I tell, because I tell strangers, I tell taxi drivers, I tell people at the sidewalk, crossing the street, because I just feel like people should know. I want people to know that people like me are among them, that we're here. And the hostages are here,
Yeah.
And it's still there. It's like maybe in 5 years I won't feel like that anymore. But now I do. I mean, this is how I feel like I need to tell people. And
so when you were at this dinner, you were at a Shabbat dinner where somebody didn't know, that was strange for you?
Yeah, I realized afterward I'm not used to it, because I'm in my synagogue, and I usually am with people from my synagogue, and they all know, so they all get it, so, like, they're sensitive to it usually, I mean, I don't expect people to be, to tiptoe around me or anything like that. And I'm not sad all the time, and I can joke and laugh and sing, and, that's fine. And I don't feel bad about that. It just, but sometimes it just feels I have distance from people who are, I wrote this in the chapter also. I was at a Shabbat table, and there were people visiting from abroad, and they said, like, how does it affect you? Like, and so someone said, he was like a retired Anglo, an American immigrant, and he said, our lives are the same, only we're sad, like we're sadder, like we just a little sadder. And I don't feel like that. I feel like my life is completely different. I'm a different person. The world is different. I,
Wow. Wow. So, Hannah, so we have the book launch. Pay attention to the book launch is on May 7th.
Right, but it's Hebrew. It's all Hebrew.
In Hebrew. And we have
it will be translated. It will be translated. That is the goal. So hold out, and I'll announce it again. I'll tell you again.
And then you have a cause match campaign coming up to build the Sustainability Center in Rahat in Chaim's memory. The date of that cause match campaign is May
18th, right?
May 18th.
May 18th.
So May 18th.
But please reach out to me, and I'll provide some links soon. Yeah,
I will. Oh, and I'll share the links. Hannah, it's always great talking to you.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing everything. I know it's not easy, and thank you for.
Thanks, Ilana. Be well. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the podcast Women Ending War. If you like this, please subscribe, share, like, and comment. Links to our channels on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple are below. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Substack. In peace, salam, and shalom.